Once you have a topic area selected, it's time to think about how to discover the opinions that already exist on the topic. Within one topic, there might be many different controversies, and relatively soon, we'll look at a way to disaggregate and determine certain kinds of controversies that are happening within a topic area. But even now, you might nevertheless begin thinking about different levels of opinion within this topic area. The first one is going to be commonsensical opinion. How do you discover what that is? Recently, we have a very powerful technology to help us with that. This is the large language model. The most popular version of it is ChatGPT. To go into ChatGPT is in some sense to discover what common sense thinks. Large language models work by taking in a huge amount of data about language that is its training data. I'm thinking of the probability for the next token or letter or word that would proceed from the prompt that you've given it. If you ask ChatGPT its opinion about something, you're not accessing a certain kind of machine intelligence that is telling you what machines think about it, nor are you even accessing any information or database on the topic that you're talking about. You're simply getting an aggregate statistical probability with some highly specific training data that is going to give you a sense of what is commonly thought on the issue. Playing around with ChatGPT or other large language models will give you a place to start. So you might begin with a prompt, something like, what are the major issues within the topic of X? It might give you a list of what those are. You might ask, what are the major controversies within this topic? Now, of course, whatever ChatGPT gives you, you have to then go and verify. It does hallucinate. It comes up with random things that aren't even real because it is simply going on the basis of a statistical probability of the next token, letter, word. But this is a good place to get a sense of what might be alive in the topic from a commonsensical point of view. The second level at which you might want to do some work, or you will need to do some work for the assignment, is to think about the common public opinion. For this, we'll need to have some way to get past just a social media feed. Our social media feeds are too tailored and specific to us. Almost all social media apps and platforms will give you something like a personalized feed that takes your search history and takes your previous viewing history and feeds you content that looks like that. That's a very bad way to assess general common opinion. The first thing we might look at are op-eds. These are opinion editorials. This is a standard feature of every major newspaper. If you got a physical copy of the newspaper, you could turn to the opinion section. Here you might find a number of different articles or columns. Some of these will be by the editorial board of the newspaper itself. It won't have a single author. It won't have a byline that says written by Timothy Barr. It will say by the editorial board. And in that case, the newspaper itself, the media organization, is putting forward its own opinion on the topic. So when it endorses a political candidate, for instance, this is always done by the editorial board. But there are also opinion columnists and guest essayists who write opinions on current controversial public topics and give us something to think about. Personally, I think that major op-ed pages of major periodicals are often not that great. The quality of the opinions there is varying at best. So to say to go to the op-ed page isn't to say go and look at someone who's smarter than you, who knows more, who's older and wiser. It's really to get a sense of what's the kind of basic, popular, and authored opinion that's around. If you looked at a number of major periodicals, the New York Times, the LA Times, you might put in the Boston Globe there if you want. What are they thinking about this particular topic? And you can search for that. Op-ed with a periodical on a particular topic, you might get a range of opinions that would give you a sense of where things lay and where to begin with your own. Outside of just going to major periodicals and reading their opinion columnists, we need to create a sort of background of public discourse on this for ourselves. There are two technologies here that I think are really powerful and important for you to use. The first one is called RSS. RSS is a standard web protocol. Almost every website will have the ability for you to subscribe to it through RSS. Once you have a RSS subscription, you'll be able to look at it in your RSS reader. An RSS reader is a different piece of software. There are many free versions of RSS readers. I personally use one called Feedly. It's a free one. You can have an app on your phone with it. You can look at it in a browser. And there are other ones that you can use and find pretty easily. It doesn't really matter which RSS reader you use. They all use the same technology. So first you'll need to get an RSS reader, and then you'll have to subscribe to a number of sites that you think are worth reading about in general. You can make that more specific to a topic with our next technology. The next thing I think you might want to use is a Google alert. Google, we all know what Google is. We know how to use Google search. I mean, there are some features that have been deprecated, but we basically all use Google search every day, probably multiple times a day. However, we probably don't use Google alerts. These are something sent to your email after you set them up, and this will allow you to specify basically a specific search term or phrase that anytime there is a hit for that in recent publications or recent news, it will be sent to you directly. So this is kind of like doing a prospective Google search. Rather than just looking at stuff that's already been said and getting a huge number of results, I want to see what's about to be said. So, for instance, I've set a Google alert for archaeological discovery in quotation marks. So every time there's an archaeological discovery, because those words are published, I get to read about it in my email. What you want to do is think about what are the appropriate search terms that will help you figure out what's going on with your particular topic. If you choose one that's too broad, you might get too much information and be overwhelmed by the number of alerts you're getting. So you have to think carefully about how to design your search terms. So, for instance, if you just put in sports gambling, almost anything that's published about sports gambling might have that phrase in it, and it will be sent to you. So you might want to use the Boolean functions in setting up a Google alert. So that's the ands and the ors. So maybe I want to have something about sports gambling in the topic that I'm interested in, but I'm really interested in legislation. So I only want to set up a Google alert for sports gambling and legislation, meaning both of those phrases need to appear in the article. Finally, we need to think a little bit about expert opinion. And here it can be overwhelming when we're just beginning. If we go to Google Scholar or something like that, and we just throw in a couple search terms, we're going to get a huge amount of data, a huge number of papers that are probably pretty arcane and hard to read, and that's going to be very discouraging. So I don't think that's the best place to start, though that might be important as we develop our arguments and our opinions through the course. One place I think you might start is the Congressional Research Service. This is a taxpayer-funded service in the United States that produces short research briefs for members of Congress who don't want to read very much either. So they do tend to be pretty short. And they're not on every topic that might be of interest and might not have something related to your particular public controversy. But if you use one of the databases, OpenCRS, for instance, will allow you to search the Congressional Research Service. It will give you some reports that might be relevant to read for you. So this would be a kind of brief, short white paper that would just give you the basic context and background without too much of an opinion that would help you understand the context for the more serious scholarly work that you will do through the course. So I recommend starting with a brief, and the Congressional Research Service is a great place to find briefs. You can find other ones by searching in other ways. The next thing that you might look for are position papers. So this would be from a think tank or from a non-governmental organization, some organization that might be relevant to the particular kind of public controversy that you're investigating here. what have they put out themselves? So this is not authored by a single scholar or a single pundit. It's just authored by an institution. So sometimes they're called white papers. Sometimes they have other names. Green and pink papers are various other kinds of ones, or position papers, reports that they put out. This will help contextualize these broad issues, and often those kinds of reports are designed for somebody who's coming into the issue without a huge amount of background. So they will, again, like the Congressional Research Service reports, provide you with some of the context that you need to understand. So I think that's a better place to start with your searches. Find a position paper, a white paper, something put out by an organization that's relevant to the topic area that you're studying, and read that in order to get background context, as well as maybe some aspect of an opinion. And of course, scholarship and research is very important and useful in forming an opinion. Early on, as you're just exploring your topic this week, it might be difficult to find scholarship or research that's appropriate for what you're talking about. So one thing you can use is, of course, Google Scholar. That will give you a huge number of results. But another thing you might use is going to the Northeastern Library's page, where they have subject-focused research study guides. This will allow you to maybe get a better sense of what are some of the databases and tools available for research in your particular area. Once you have a sense of the commonsensical position that's produced by a large language model and your own head, once you have a sense of what are the popular and competing public positions that circulate in the news and among organizations that are related to the topic, and maybe once you have a sense of some of the expert positions that are relevant, you will be well informed enough to begin to think about what kinds of propositions, what kinds of actual controversies you want to take a stand on. This is a way to get some of the context that's necessary in order to make that next step.